Hey gang, welcome back to another fun day in the shop. I am Bob and it's time now for another shenanigan. I like practicing that. It's fun. And thanks again, Barry. Hey, so we've been working on my 1989 Jeep Comanche pickup, getting it ready for the Easter Jeep Safari in Moab in April. Now it's one step above Pavement Princess and a step below Rock Crawler. Papa Smurf, as I affectionately refer to it, is in much too good of a condition to beat it up, but it's also a four-wheel drive and meant to be used. But for it to be reliable, at 258,000 miles, it was time to give it some love. So in some previous videos, I've pulled the head, ground the valves, done a gasket match to the intake manifold and the head for the intake ports. We did some work there. Have the head put back on. It's all torqued down and ready to go. So today we're going to focus on getting the intake manifold and a new exhaust manifold that I've purchased all prepped and installed. Stick around, let's have some fun. One of the first things I'm going to do today is actually do some work on my new exhaust manifold. Now, when I pulled the old exhaust manifold off, I knew that it had some cracks and I had some leaks. So I went ahead and welded this up thinking I was going to reuse it. But then I thought to myself, well, why would I do that when I could put on a brand new one? So for, I don't know, I think 180 bucks, I bought a new exhaust manifold. Thought everything would be nice and fresh and new, but a couple things that need to be done. Now, this is the, I would call it the heat hose. I don't know if that's the right word, but this is for EGR. So this came out of the exhaust manifold, goes up into the bottom of the intake manifold to draw gases up into the intake manifold to burn unspent fuel. Now, if you live in an area that has emissions controls, you cannot do what I'm doing here. I pulled this out under great stress and great duress, but I did get this all out. I noticed with my new exhaust manifold, it comes with these two plugs in here. So this plug is for my O2 sensor, no problem. This plug would be for my, my heat pipe would go in here to go up to my intake manifold. But I want to omit that, and as fate would have it, they're two different size plugs. So I'm going to be putting my O2 sensor in here, and I could put this in here no problem, but this is a 7/8, I believe it's a 7/8 plug that I was not able to find another of here in town where I live, and don't feel like ordering something. I've seen a write-up, I think, on the Comanche Club on a particular part number, but I thought this is a good steel plug I could put in here and life would be good, but I actually want to put this in my aluminum intake manifold because this is going to seal up real nice. That means I'm going to have to get creative, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this up pipe up since I'm not using it anymore. These threads are all goobered up, so this is junk. So what I'll do is I will cut this so I can, this is a flared end, so I can take this plug out that I know works in here and is threaded fine, and I'm going to seal that up. So we'll do that together today. Another thing that bothers me is this little heat duct. This is to pull hot air off the manifold into your air box to help the engine warm up quicker. The original one, you notice, is almost rigid. It fits on there nice, and this aftermarket is pretty funky. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to cut this one off, put this over here because this is a daily driver, and in the wintertime here in northern Arizona, it does get, well, it does get cold. So I just assume my heater works sooner than later. So let's get after it. We're going to manufacture and fabricate something to use this to plug this hole here, and we're going to swap these one for one. Well, that's probably a funny angle. I can't see what you see, but let's wing it, okay? So the first thing is I talked about wanting to make a plug for this because the plug that came with this new exhaust manifold, I want to put in my intake manifold, and these threads match up nicely. Now I happen to know that for my old up pipe for my EGR, this fits in, but obviously that's a problem, right? So why not, happen to have this bolt that fits just right, why not drop that little bad boy in there, weld it all up, keep all my heat up here so I'm not distorting the threads. We'll call that our plug. I think that'll work. The other thing is I mentioned that I didn't really like how this small heat transfer tube was working, so I've taken this off of the new manifold, pitched it, and I took the original one that fits much better, separated it, and I think I like this a whole bunch better. So let's see if the old welder will cooperate with this little thin stuff or not. Well, that's not pretty, but I think that'll do just fine for the project we've got at hand. Let's take care of this little conundrum. Well, they're not pretty, but it's nothing that a grinder won't clean up. All right, here we are, right side up again. Now, I realize this isn't pretty. This is pot metal. It doesn't weld well to steel. That's okay. It's better than it was, and it's not flopping around like that aftermarket was. And again, I like to have this on there to draw warm air off of the exhaust manifold, goes into my air box, because in the wintertime helps my engine warm up more quickly. And well, I'm getting old and I sort of like to have that heater. Here's the cleaned up version of what this looks like. Remember, a welder's best friend is a 4-inch grinder, which I did not introduce here, but I'm fairly confident that that's not going to have any exhaust leaks. It's just that bolt dropped in there. You can see it sticking out here. It's not in the way for anything here. But I did get to thinking, this was a flare end that I cut off, okay? And so that flared end is what was making good contact down inside here to seal it. And I thought, well, I don't have a flat surface here for a nice washer. So I cut the end off of that tube that will just drop down in here. Now I know that I've got an original set of clearances, and everything is going to go down into that little bad boy to seal up. And I now also have room for my O2 sensor to go in there. I'll tighten that up all nice and handy dandy, and we'll have some good times, right? The only other thing I can think of is the bolts that come with this go through. I thought about welding them on. I don't think I'm going to. I think I'll leave it loose. That way I can grumble a little bit trying to get a wrench up there later when I seal everything up. Let's go take a look now over here at the intake manifold. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was doing some things with EGR, and Let's just say that this Jeep no longer has an EGR valve because it sits right here. This is where it goes on your intake manifold. Remember, what is it? Emissions gas recirculation, I think it's called. It's designed to take unspent gases from the exhaust up that pipe that I just cut up, draw it into the intake manifold and reburn those for cleaner burning emissions. This is regulated. There's a valve in here that opens and closes to determine when it lets air come up through here from the exhaust manifold or not. Now, some time ago, I'd had problems with my EGR valve, so I'd made this little plate that I'd put in to emit or omit my EGR valve, but I left this here sitting in place. And I thought, well, that's just kind of silly. I happen to live where I'm not required to do an emissions test to pass for my registration. So what I did is taking that off and using this gasket, I had a piece of this 1/8" steel. I dropped on there. I outlined it. I cut it out, cleaned it up, made sure it was nice and smooth on both sides. Cut a piece of gasket material in there, and I put that on, in effect, sealing off this EGR valve. It would be considered a restrictor plate. But what I do need to do, something I was just fiddling around with earlier, is this is the plug that came in the exhaust manifold, my new one, that I did not want to use in my exhaust manifold, but it fits right up here in my intake manifold real nice. So I'm going to put that in, tighten everything up nice. I'll now have a restrictor plate for my EGR. Everything's plugged up. I can install my intake and my exhaust in 2 separate pieces because I don't have that pipe binding them together, and life balance will be restored. At least that's what it says in the fine print. Let's go take this stuff out to the Jeep now, and let's get ready to mount this bad boy back onto the engine. It's time, the fateful moment, to start some real reassembly, right? So everything's cleaned up. I'm not too worried about that tiny little bit of surface that's on there. Let's put on our new intake exhaust manifold. That's always a fun thing with a straight 6, is they've got both your exhaust, intake and your exhaust. You'll notice, well, you might not be able to notice it, when I did my gasket matching, that this intake port and the opening in the gasket are now the same. Before, the port was much smaller, as it was on the intake manifold as well. Let's grab our nice new exhaust manifold here. We're gonna work you down here into place. Now, if I had this up pipe coming up for my intake manifold, it's usually best to assemble them together. That makes things really tough to reach. Because, for example, I've got a nut clear in the back here I need to get started that's really difficult to do with the intake manifold in the way. So I'm going to go ahead and get that going. And let's see, so we're going to have bolt here, bolt down here, up. Got one in the middle, bottom, top, bottom, top. I think it's time, let's see, how do I want to do this? Since the intake manifold pretty well sits in place, let's see if we can simplify just a whisker. And maybe if I get these started, and you'll see why in a minute, I can set the intake manifold on it instead of putting it in place and trying to reach up into a very difficult position to get these bolts started. And if I work it right, I can drop stuff and, well, never to be seen again. I'm sure you guys, when you do this work, never drop anything, never have any clumsy moments. You know, I like to share it all. And you know, to those of you who've never tackled a job like this before and you think, man, it's just too big of a job, don't be afraid to try. You know, if you've got something that's broken or something not working well, what are you going to do? Make it worse? You know, I just thought of something. I don't know if this is going to work for me because I do have these keepers here. Yep, I was just given bad information, wasn't I? Yes, I was. So there's an alignment dowel right here. that the intake manifold needs to slide over. I thought I was being crafty by having this in place to drop the intake manifold onto. Oh, silly Bob. Let's see if we can just take these out again. And we'll actually install it like a normal person would have done the first time. But I guess that's what comes with not being afraid to try, right? If it's already broke, you're not going to break it. Just get after it. All right, let's see how that intake manifold sits in there. You want to be careful you don't goober up your gasket. You don't want to put any gouges or anything in it. Come on, turkey. I know you can do it. Well, what have we got holding this up here? There we go. And there we go. Yep, those two alignment pins would definitely have been an issue if I had left them in place. Okay, well, time now for the fun of getting bolts started, getting everything put together, and getting one step closer to having Papa Smurf on the trail. Well, this is what it looks like now, reassembled. Much more full engine compartment now, isn't it? We've got the exhaust manifold tightened up. We've got the intake manifold in. Now, just like when you're torquing the head or anything else, if you're going to be tightening something down, don't just start at this bolt and work your way down and all back and forth. Start in the middle. Happens to be a nut that holds the exhaust manifold here, but this bolt holds both the intake and the exhaust manifold. So go through and snug everything up consistently so that you know that everything's up tight, everything's seated like it's supposed to, and then start in the middle and work your way out. Tighten it up in the middle, tighten it up, one out, one out, one out, one out. Move your way, because that way, think of it like something that's going to flex. If you tighten the middle, tighten the middle and then let it roll out tight this way, that's better than if you go all different places. You can actually buckle things up and make strange things happen you would never expect with solid metal. So that's going to button this part up for the day. And I know that was kind of a choppy way to go about things, but lots of hope for this poor old engine here. I've got to put on a new throttle cable, put on the intake, got to put on some heat shields. Quite a bit of work to do here. Fuel rail and injectors. We'll do that all on the next video. And then later on, I'm going to also be moving the alternator from down low up high where it's easy to reach and easy to work on, and see what other kind of fun we can have with old Papa Smurf in this 4-liter. Hey, if you enjoy this content, click like, click subscribe. My goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers before Matt's Off-Road Games 2025. Help me out, would you? Go out and make somebody smile today. You both deserve it. Bob out.